Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're gonna have a really fun and exciting hybrid panel. You don't normally have a panel at the Ideas Festival that ends with the sitting governor of the state where you're sitting whisking in and talking to you. But that's what's going to happen today. The Governor Polis, was originally going to open today's panel, but there was a major news development, which is the Colorado Avalanche won the Stanley Cup. And they celebrated today with a parade, I understand, in Denver. And even so, even though the governor needed to be there for that, he nonetheless is also going to join us. So he'll come in at some point during our remarks and then has asked to say a few words to you all to close the panel and talk a little bit about what's going on here in Colorado with workforce development. We've got a wonderful panel here for you today. I'm David Leonhardt with the New York Times. Sitting on the far end here is Juan Rajlin, who is the treasurer of Alphabet Google. Sitting in the middle is Delilah Wilson Scott, who is the Chief Diversity Officer of Comcast, and as part of that, she oversees the Comcast NBC Universal Foundation. And sitting next to me is Tracy Palangian, who's the co-founder of Social Finance, which is a national nonprofit looking to find new ways, new models to finance social change. And as we start, I'm going to ask each of them to kind of tell you how they've been thinking, how they've been working on this problem, and then we're going to get into it. I just want to start a little bit by kind of setting the scene for why workforce development and the broader issue of skills are such vital issues. I'll do it quickly because I think many of these ideas are familiar to people. But I think they're part of a profound challenge in American society today, which is by almost any measure, inequality has soared over the last 40 or so years. And not only has inequality soared, but living standards for many people in the bottom 60 or 70% have really stagnated. If living standards for everyone were rising, but they were rising faster at the top, you could say maybe that's not such a serious problem. But incredibly broad measures, even not just economic measures, but measures like life expectancy, have stagnated or even declined for the bottom. And there's some fascinating work that some of you all may be familiar with. I recommend it to you if you've only heard it briefly summarized, by Ann Case and Angus Deaton, economists at Princeton University. They're famous for this phrase, deaths of despair. But they've actually done much broader work looking at the kind of decline of opportunities and health and well-being for folks at the bottom. And what the measure that they use to distinguish between the people who've done pretty well in society and the people who've struggled is a 4-year college degree. And even if you believe, as Michael Sandel does and many other people do, that we shouldn't be trying to get everyone to go to college, the fundamental idea there is that in our highly technological, globalized economy, education and more broadly skills are absolutely vital to workers to be able to thrive in the market. Whether it's the kind of skills that would allow you to get a good blue-collar job, or whether it's the kind of skills that would involve a 4-year degree, skills are really vital to people doing well today. And yet, we have had a real stagnation of workforce skills. By some of our best measurements, a typical 30-year-old man today is no more educated, no more trained than his dad was. That is inconsistent with American history. Through most of modern American history, each generation has been more skilled, more educated than the last one. And I think it's driving a lot of our problems with living standards, and not just living standards, but with frustration and anger that we see in society today. So that is my attempt to summarize an incredibly complex problem in just a couple minutes. And now what I want to do is I want to ask each of our panelists to kind of tell you just briefly how they're working on this issue, and then we're going to dig into some of these questions of what we can do. But starting with Juan, I want each of them to kind of give you a sense of how they're getting their hands dirty trying to fix this problem.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Yes, you might wonder why am I here? I'm the treasurer of Google, so that means my job is to look after the company's balance sheet and invest and do financial risk management. So what do I have to do with workforce development and skills education, right? The reason why I'm here is, at Google we think skills education is part of the solution of how we can reduce the racial wealth gap in the US and reduce the opportunity gap. And we've been doing work with our google.org foundation, providing grants. But earlier this year, we came together with social finance, with Tracy, to see if we could scale this further. And so we set up a $100 million Google Career Certificates Fund. We can get into it in more detail as we get into the conversation. But it combines not only grants, but also our balance sheet. And it's a combination of the two. It's an innovative financing model, and the notion is scale this well beyond what we would be able to do if we were only dealing with philanthropy alone, which is what we're trying to do. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Impressively succinct. Delilah.
Thank you for having us. I mean, I think Juan just gave an incredible example of how private sector can be very instrumental in issues like workforce development, obviously when it comes to our talent. But when I think about the assets we have at Comcast, NBC Universal, we're a large media franchise. Through our platforms, we can raise awareness to certain issues in different communities. And of course, from a technology standpoint, as a broadband company, for over a decade, we've been focused on closing the digital divide. Through the pandemic, I think many people realize how critical it was to be connected. Not only to be connected, but to be able to fully participate in the digital economy. So we've made a $1 billion commitment to advance digital equity. We know that the pandemic accelerated many jobs that will be obsolete, many jobs that are most likely to be held by underrepresented populations. So thinking about how is the changing dynamic of tech workers in the tech industry, and how can we be more thoughtful about not just the work we're doing through our foundation and philanthropy, but philanthropic capital works best when it's coupled with the other assets of the company. So thinking about our own workforce and how we're upskilling, reskilling, and what we're learning in the field.
Thank you.
David, you talked a lot about different aspects of the failing economy, especially for the populations that we care about. And you definitely touched upon the very scary statistics around rising income inequality. I think the scarier couple to the income inequality statistic is stagnant economic mobility. It's okay if society is unequal, if you can actually get up that ladder. But if you look at Raj Chetty's research, this is The Economist, he basically said that children born in the 1940s, while only having an 8% chance of going to college, 90% of those people out-earned their parents as adults. That same number today is around a third, while 40% of people going to college. So this stagnant economic mobility is having significant social and economic consequences. And in the last few days, we even talked about what that meant for our democracy. What we study at social finance and implement at social finance is thinking about what is the education and skilling system to deliver people with skills and that upward mobility path. And since the post-war era, our post-secondary system, the college system, has been the engine of social and economic mobility, not just for citizens, but also delivering talent that American businesses need. So the American competitiveness is really resting on the education and training system that produces the talent for them to power our companies and our economy. And what we're seeing is that that system is no longer working for the vast majority of Americans, especially those who do not go to the residential 4-year, 18-year-old college, but the other kind of college. Most Americans go to community colleges as working adults, trying to get skills while raising a family and holding down a job, et cetera. And what we do at Social Finance is to come up with new models to think about 3 questions: who pays, who benefits, and who bears the risk. And I think we can all appreciate that the status quo is that the individual bears all the risk. They take on student loans. They hope that the college journey would yield them with a degree that's useful, that would launch them into that economic escalator. And we know the reality is not so. So how do we rethink with Juan and others, mixing private funding with public funding and creatively with philanthropy, importantly, to de-risk the proposition for the individual so that the other players in the ecosystem, employers, schools and training programs, actually bear that risk.
So let's go right at this topic that I know people often have heated feelings about, which is college, right? Which is, and I take the point that we cannot try to build an economy where everyone goes to college, because right now fewer than half of adults, substantially fewer than half of adults, have a 4-year degree. So there's no way we're going to build an economy in which the only way to have a decent life is going to college. It would leave huge numbers of people out. Yet I can't help think about the fact that all of us probably would tell our own kids to go to college. I've certainly encouraged mine to, and they will. I would guess that's true for the vast majority of all of you, right? And so when I hear in discussions like this at think tanks and other places, well, college isn't for everyone, there's a part of me that worries a little bit, aren't we sort of saying college is for my kids and not yours? Can you talk a little bit about what is the role that college should play, and how do we make sure that we both simultaneously acknowledge the reality that we can't build an economy in which the only path to a good life is a college degree, and yet we also don't want to create a situation in which we've got a two-tier economy in which the children of the privileged go to college and college is for everyone else?
Yeah, maybe what I'd say is if we just focus on college, we'll exclude a huge number of people, right? 2/3 of the labor force in the US does not have a college degree. 70% of Black Americans don't have a college degree. 80% of Hispanic Americans don't have a college degree. And then when you look at jobs, 2/3 of jobs require some level of digital skills in the US. And when you look at college grads, 40% graduate underskilled or without the skills that the jobs require. So one of the surprises we've had with our Google career certificates is 40% of the learners that go through our program are actually college grads that are looking to supplement the skills that they obtained in their college education with digital skills, which are more relevant for the labor market. So I think skills and digital skills is a really important part of the equation. I don't want to digress the question that we're going to talk about college, but I just would like to say we have to think about, this beyond college, because otherwise we will exclude a huge swath of the U.S. population. We have to address, that part of the population. But
yeah, I mean, what I would add is I think people assume that many of us who are working on the workforce development space are saying there's college or not college. And what we're saying is the traditional four-year experience is not going to work for the majority of this country. But let's just walk it back for a second. Why do people go to college, right? You're looking to obtain a skill. And college is sort of cleaner in that way, in that you have a degree, easy for companies to sort of discern whether you complete it or not, because you're looking for a path to economic mobility at the end of the day. And I think that notion is the same for everybody, but everybody can't complete that, right after high school. And a lot of the higher quality programs, you're actually obtaining those skills and a comparable education, but over a longer period of time, built in with other flexibility that takes into account the other social issues that you might be facing. So I don't think it's college or not college. I think it's how do we take that four-year experience and make it work and meet people where they are in a way that helps them realize that American dream that college represents to so many people. But I do think it's not one or the other. It's just how do we create different paths to get there?
I mean, it almost seems like, and Tracy, I want to come to you in a second, it almost seems like part of what you're saying there is we want to make sure that the opportunity to go to college is open to essentially the entire population, while simultaneously acknowledging most people are not going to end up with a four-year bachelor's degree, and we need to build an economy that works for them, as well as an economy that allows people who have that degree to add skills, because it's not like a treatment that you have to take only once.
Right. And for the goal to be economic mobility rather than me having a diploma.
Rather than the sheepskin, right?
Exactly. Just to double down on what Delilah was saying, and obviously, there's a bunch of us here that would hold the liberal arts view of education, that you go to college to get social transformation, personal transformation, intellectual transformation. But most people want to go to college because they want to have a better life and have financial security for their families. So it's not really kind of like, do you go to vocational trade school or you go to liberal arts school? But the idea that if most people actually want to have economic opportunities, often these more skills-based programs might be more efficient and effective at delivering for their goals. And I would also say that there are so many jobs in the American labor market that do not require a four-year degree. There are 11.5 million job openings across the country right now, which is actually the highest statistic, well, Last month it was actually 11.9, so it's come down from the peak, but it's the highest statistics since the Bureau of Labor Statistics started collecting this information in the year 2000. And a lot of these jobs actually pay middle-class wages. Our economy depends on these workers. 17% of the labor force are actually in the healthcare workforce. If you go talk to any hospital CEO, they'll tell you the pain points of nurses not being able to fill all the positions, ORs shut down because they don't have the surgical technicians, blood banks not being able to work because the blood bank workers are that. So like actually the economy is stalled because we don't have the skilled labor. And if you look at all these job categories, many of them are stackable credentials. You start off as with a CNA and you move with certified nursing assistant, and you become a licensed practical nurse, and you become a registered nurse, and you keep kind of stack it. But this idea that you should sit down in one meal, eat a 4-year degree in one sitting is, that concept is quickly eroding.
So you alluded to this a little bit, Tracy, when you were talking about this idea of removing the risk, where people go get training, they go into debt, whether it's for training or whether it's for college, and then they kind of don't emerge from it. And I guess I'd like to ask all of you to talk not just about that idea, and maybe talk specifically about what you're doing in that, but also the larger idea of, we all have been hearing about workforce training and the importance of it for decades. And I do think there's some skepticism. Can it really work, right? Is it actually going to deliver people skills that they're going to be able to use to get a good job? Do we have good bang for the buck? So can you talk a little bit more about kind of this idea, the specific idea of how we make sure that people don't end up with debt and no skills? And then let's broaden it out a little bit from there and talk about how do we go from this idea of workforce training, which I think no one's against, to something that actually has some rigor and accountability to it.
So maybe I can talk generally, and then Juan, maybe you can talk about the specifics of the $100 million Google Search Fund. So if you think about workforce spending as a country, so these are the entities that spend money in workforce training, is business and it's government, largely. Philanthropy is a tiny, tiny little slice. The United States, sadly, spends 1/10 of what France spends as a percentage of our GDP, 1/8 of what Germany spends, we're 1/3 of the OECD average. So we're way at the bottom of a developed nation in terms of how much we invest in workforce training. On top of that, so there's the how much we spend, and then there's the how well we spend it. Sadly, our workforce development procurement system is mostly focused on outputs. How many people enroll in your program? Everything is paid on an enrollment basis, number of hours in the classroom, and never around outcomes. Do people actually graduate and get jobs and have economic mobility? So that's the first problem. The second problem is around who bears the risk if you're outside of the government-funded workforce system. And that's when the individual takes on all the risk, while the schools and training programs continue to collect tuition income regardless of outcomes because it's based on enrollment. So what we're trying to rebuild the system with is to actually think about who gets to share the risk and who gets to pay and who gets to benefit. So in terms of the training provider and the school, we're basically saying you gotta get paid based on outcomes. So, Texas State Technical College is a perfect example. It's a public college in Texas. It's a 2-year college, mostly in the trades. And the chancellor was so visionary that he said, I don't want to be paid based on seat time. I'm actually going to be paid on job placement for my graduates. So, and we're trying to replicate the same thing for our nonprofit partners, training providers, whereby we're only advance a portion of the program costs to them, and then they actually get paid the rest upon the success of the individual. So the individuals only pay if they're successful at landing a job. The training providers are only made whole if they deliver outcomes for students. And where possible, we want to encourage employers to take on the payment on behalf of students. So that's the arrangement, but it's much more exciting if Juan can animate it in the actual fund.
No pressure. Yeah, so 5 years ago, we came to the realization that we had a responsibility in making sure technology benefits everyone, right? And to give access to more people to benefit from technology. And digital skills is a core part of that in order to get access to jobs. So we implemented career certificates in IT support, in data analytics, in user experience design, in these digital skill fields. It's 3 to 6 months. You have no prior experience or no prior education required. You could take the courses online, and they're free. So we rolled this out, and 5 years later, we've graduated 70,000 people in the United States. 75% report a positive career change. Either they got a job in the field of their study, or they got a raise, or they got a promotion. Over half are Black, Latino, or Asian, and 40% come from the lowest income strata in the United States, so making less than $30,000 when they enter the program. So clearly there's something good here. And so for 5 years, Google.org has been writing grants to nonprofit partners to provide wraparound services to the learners. So when you ask the question, what can get in the way of somebody completing the program and then getting a job in an IT field, for example, life gets in the way, right? Most are parents. They have to take care of little ones and kids. Most have full-time jobs, sometimes more than one full-time job. So they need support. Also, they need support to apply in jobs in fields that they're not used to because they didn't grow up in the corporate world, right? So you may need help writing your resume or with interview skills or getting connected with employers. We have a consortium of employers. So this program has been funded exclusively with philanthropy so far. So the question we're trying to solve is, how can we scale this well beyond what we're doing? That's why we set up the fund with social finance. It's $100 million. It's the biggest ever commitment to skills education ever made, right? It combines loans and grants, and it's all around the student's success. So if a student graduates, lands a job in the field of study, and makes $40,000 or more, then they pay back the support that they received at 0% interest cost. And then the cash flow that comes back to the fund can get redeployed by Tracy and her team so that more students can go through the program. If you don't graduate, if you don't get a job, if you don't hit $40,000, you pay nothing. So the risk is on the education provider. In this case, is nonprofit partners like Europe or Merit America, which are implementing partners on this. So this will be equivalent to the schools and the college system actually taking the risk if students don't graduate and don't hit a certain income threshold, right? And then, so that's how it's set up.
And can you just give us a couple examples? What kinds of jobs would successful graduates of one of these programs make, and like what's a typical cost? If you do go through this program and succeed, what are you paying back?
Yeah, so an example we love to talk about at Google is somebody that's at Google. Her name's Chelsea Rucker. In 2018, she found herself homeless with 2 girls. And through Goodwill, which is one of our nonprofit partners, she came across the Google IT Career Cert and completed the program. She did it at 4 a.m. before her girls woke up in the morning. And through Goodwill, she met with our data center team at Google. She's now a data center analyst at Google. That's the kind of example that we can have.
Just to put the numbers in context, a representative person like a Chelsea could be an hourly worker at a food service industry making $30,000 a year. They come out typically doubling their salary, so and the repayment period is 5 years, $100 a month, so $6,000 if you remained employed over the income threshold during this period. So the person would repay $6,000 in the next 5 years while they have an income gain of $30,000 a year times 5 years, $150,000. So that's the math.
And the programs obviously cost more than that, and that's what you're funding, essentially. The folks going through this program are not paying the entire cost of the program.
The program cost depends on the economics of the nonprofit service provider, and its average is around $6,000, but it could be more, it could be right at $6,000. It depends on the program.
Delilah, in the big picture, do you think I'm right to kind of question this notion that we need more rigor and more accountability in workforce development overall?
I think it's appropriate to be focused on the right outcomes, which is not how many people completed a training program. I mean, if you look at workforce development programs, I can speak to some research we released with JFF earlier this year on Black tech workers. Jobs for the Future, great national nonprofit organization out of Boston. And we brought a number of different practitioners, experts, employers around the table to say, well, where does it break down? So the incentives, which we talked about, which is how many of them are actually being placed. One piece, though, is many training programs might be focused on dated data about where the jobs are. So they might be getting you to a job, but not a job that has a true career path to economic mobility. Tracy walked through what that looks like for healthcare. But if I'm coming in as a data analyst, do I know that in 18 months I should be getting this certificate so I can move up in my career, as an example? So one is, does it have that actual career path? Two, I mean, the income, is my income increasing? That's a question that workforce development providers should be able to ask. We work with Perscolas a lot, based out of the Bronx, an incredible team, and we look at not just the graduation rates of the program, but their ability to actually place people and then track them over time. And you definitely see people coming, to Tracy's point, people doubling their salary because they've acquired an in-demand skill set. There are many digital skills training programs. The question is, have you worked with an employer to define that skill set, and does that employer have a job, at the end of that program? And is that employer engaged? There's one thing to attain that technical skill set, then it's some of the power skills that Juan referred to. How am I successful once I get into the corporate environment? I've never been in this space before. How do I navigate? How do I seek out a mentor? And the training has to happen on the employer side as well as the employee side. And it's great to be working with partners while we're learning what's happening out in the field, but we can also improve our own systems. We've been able to take frontline engineers and technical staff and increase their specific skill sets and show them different paths in engineering, as an example, through a program called Grow to Code. And we'll work with organizations like CodePath, who, once you've gone through something like Perscolas, how can you obtain another skill set that ultimately does get a lot of people on a path to a college degree, which still matters. So I think the rigor and accountability it's just that the focus hasn't always been on the right place.
Yep. Let's talk about scale for a minute. I mean, can individual corporate programs, even if they're successful, are they big enough to meet the scale of this challenge, or do we need a role from the federal government or state governments to basically make these programs much larger than even Google or Comcast, NBC Universal are able to do? Is there a vital role here for government, or is this something that can be done through philanthropies in the private sector?
I have a strong point of view. I know that trust in our government is not the highest at this point, but let's not forget that, trust in government was the highest after the war, and we believe that government can fix things. So, this is in the province of government, and if we can spend money more effectively and also allocate more resources toward this arena, I think we can really kind of see the scaled outcomes that we want. However, it's not just spending public dollars more effectively, is how does the government partner with the private sector to make sure that the connective tissue actually exists, that these programs that the government would be funding based on outcomes are actually connected to the demands of the labor market. This 11 million numbers is extraordinary. It should not work like this. There's so much friction in the system, and if the private sector and the government could partner more creatively, more effectively, we can also see great outcomes. Finally, having corporates like Google, Comcast, and others to really lean in. I know ESG is a controversial word, not least I went to a conversation yesterday, but these are real measurable outcomes that Comcast is funding through these various programs. The Google Cert Fund, inherent in the structure, is outcomes. And if we can really think about how corporates can show up in the S of the ESG with measurable contributions to society, that's also a wonderful way to get at the scale.
Do you each agree? We need more from government?
Definitely. And I do think, private sector is bringing innovation, stronger research and data, and actual outcomes that can influence that. I mean, as much resources as all of us are putting on the table, it's dwarfed by government dollars when it comes to workforce development programs. And that's an old system that's just repeating itself. And we have to fund the types of programs and innovation that's not going to happen in the traditional government chain. So I think if we can break that cycle, because we both want, private sector and government want the same outcomes, but the system is not, their system is not built to support that now. And I think we can put up more evidence to make that easier.
Yeah, agreed. The only thing I would say is I think we could all play a role, right? Philanthropy has a huge role to play. Corporates and private players have a huge role to play. The reason why we set up this fund this way is we think it's never been done before at this scale, but we think this model is actually scalable. And we want to prove it. We're going to do research and publish the research. We're going to literally prove the economic mobility that we can generate from this. And the notion is, if it works, and we think it will, then hopefully there are other players represented here in this room that can replicate this and lean in. And then we can move the needle. We didn't do this just for Google. We want this to be, to go beyond that. And maybe there's a scale that, if we all participate, can move the needle in economic mobility in the US. That's the idea.
Well, the governor has arrived. Welcome, Governor. The governor's going to come up in a minute. Tracy, can you just kind of help everybody understand what's going on here in Colorado, specifically in this area?
Well, it's exciting that the governor's joining us, not least. We could not be more inspired by his new executive order to use skills-based hiring for state employees instead of the traditional degree requirement, which is just a huge deal. So kudos to that. We talked earlier about how to maximize the efficiency and effectiveness of the public purse, and we're just incredibly excited that we're working with a coalition of Colorado philanthropists, businesses, civil society players, and local government to put something together called the Pay It Forward Workforce Development Fund. So we're going to raise money from the public sector, philanthropy, and the private sector. And building on the model that we've built in New Jersey, this fund is going to support the training of the sectors of the future in Colorado, which are IT and cybersecurity, the skilled trades, heavy machinery, and other jobs that are needed by the Colorado economy. And then we'll finance people using outcomes-based loans like the ones that Juan discussed, so that successful worker would repay the cost of the program back into the fund so that more Colorado citizens could get trained. So it's inherently sustainable because it recycles, and it's inherently outcomes-focused because we know whether programs are working for people. So we're incredibly excited about the work here.
Thanks for that background. Tracy, thank you. Delilah, thank you. Juan, thank you. Governor Polis, the stage is yours.
So I'm a little hoarse. I just came off our big Colorado Avalanche victory parade down in Denver, so go Avalanche. Welcome, especially those of you visiting our wonderful state. We're so excited to have you here. I hope you're enjoying the festival. Thank you to our thought leaders for sharing their thoughts. I really think that this is the most exciting topic because this is truly a revolution that we are watching in real time as we speak. About how workforce preparation looks. It's true in the public sector, the private sector. It ties into some of the macro social things occurring, like great resignation, people changing their work-life balance, telecommuting, really factoring into a new way we look at how we prepare people for careers. Now, to be clear, the legacy model, I suspect that many of you and myself went to college, I have a bachelor's degree, some of you might have advanced degrees. That'll be there. I don't think that that's going to be gone in 10 years or 20 years. I can't say 50 years, who the heck knows, but I mean, my kids are 8 and 10. There's a good chance they're going to go to college, but it's not, I don't think about it the way that my parents did. For the three of us, my kids, my parents both went to college. They said, the three of you, you're going to college, right? That was what me and my siblings did. For my kids, they may. It's still likely, but that's not important in many ways because there are so many other great ways to prepare them for even in greater success, and we can even demonstrate significantly greater ROI earning from other routes that are different than conventional four-year degrees. Of course, the Aspen Ideas Festival is famous for being a leading forum for big and bold ideas. And what's happening in workforce preparation is big, it is bold, and it's happening. So we either get with it or we get out of the way. We are trying our best as a state to get with it on several fronts. One is moving as a public sector employer. We have 31,000 people that work for the state, and being on the cutting edge of implementing skills-based hiring for our jobs. In fact, by the end of this year, December, just a few months away, the majority, over 50% of our postings will not have degree requirements, because we know this is an imperative not only to fill our jobs, like many of you who might be in business, we're having trouble filling our jobs, if you've heard that lately. That's a thing, and this helps. Also helps with equity goals and access goals. Because we know that no matter where you got the skills that we need in a particular job, we want to value that. And maybe you got them in the US military. Maybe you got them as a homemaker or rearing children. Maybe you got them as a independent business person starting your own business. There are many ways to get those skills, and of course, what we as employers want to see, and what increasingly we'll have, is valuable ways of credentialing those skills that feeds into our HR systems that we can count on. This is about a world where we focus on developing our talent pipeline in the same way businesses and industry develop supply chains. What is more important than human capital when it comes down to it? And that's what the innovative leaders joining us today are doing, really about a supply chain for skills that can match our economic demands, but also this is something that we can celebrate socially as breaking down barriers to success, breaking down barriers that exist along economic lines, along racial lines, along geographic lines. The COVID-19 pandemic only accelerated this movement to a skills-based workforce, created a disruption. It created an imperative around these innovative practices for the workplace shortages that many of us face and the increased mobility that people have. And in Colorado, in addition to leading the way on the public sector hiring side, the 31,000 state employees, large employer, we might not move as fast as some companies like Google, who haven't cared if people have had degrees for a number of years, but we're moving there ahead of many movers in the private sector. In addition to that, we want to, and we're investing in adapting our talent pipeline as a state, which is generally our community college systems, things that can coexist with our 4-year and 2-year institutions, our workforce centers, towards really leaning into and embracing new models of upskilling, reskilling, how we can certify skills, and meet people where they are in their lives, right? Not always realistic to think that somebody mid-career is going to go back to college per se, drop what they're doing, become a student, but maybe they would be interested in being part of a 12-week intensive program, or being able to apprentice at a career job that they can learn while they earn, right? This is a very small example of this. We're like many workplace shortages, we don't have enough lifeguards in our pools. Our public pools were closed. We want to get our public pools open, so we said we're going to do a learn while you earn to get more, we could say kids, but it's people of all ages, to be lifeguards, right? So we're going to, rather than have to take a week out of your life and train to be a lifeguard, we're going to pay you $1,000 for that week, which is pretty good. And it takes about 36 hours. They have CPR training. So we announced that. We're going to get our public pools open. We were at 57% a few weeks ago. We're trying to get 100% capacity soon. And of course, a college or graduate degree as a pathway to a strong career is an option. It's an option that some of your kids or grandkids might take. It's a requisite for some professions still, right? And perhaps even in 10 and in 20 years. But the days of it being the only option, or what people thought is a preferred option or a best option, are frankly already over. And not everybody has acknowledged that, but those days have ended. It's simply about the demands of our economy to have the best person with the best skill in every position. And that values the way that they acquired those skills, no matter where or how in life they did so. Many private sector employers are leading the way, especially in the technology industry with programmers, It's about what you can code and what you can do, often with starting salaries in the high 6 digits, sometimes with a 2 or even a 3 in front of it. We have, in Colorado, one of the strongest economies in the country. There's more jobs now than before the pandemic. Unemployment is very low. So we want to grow that pool and make sure that everybody can perform, earn, and produce at the top of their capabilities, right? Earn, that's what's important for them. We want them to earn, that's great. Produce for our economy, grow our economy. We don't want squandered, wasted skills, somebody working in a position and not able to deploy the skills that they have, no matter how they got them in life. And that's why we're fully embracing this approach, both across our interfaces with the career and training pipeline, community colleges, workforce centers, apprenticeships. We have, from my office, Misty Wainwright is here, who heads up our efforts in this area across a number of different agencies in the public sector, and leading the way in implementing this in our own hiring that we do. It's about the talent we need to power our state, the talent you need to power businesses, the talent we need to power our future. Connecting people with resources and skills to build that career and filling a role in the economy that allows our overall economy to grow. In our state, we talk about our vision as a Colorado for all, and we're also excited about the opportunity to really break down barriers and innovate and lead. This is happening, and when a revolution's happening, we all have to figure out how, again, you get with it or get out of the way. And that's really a challenge we have about how we can leverage intellectual capacity and training capacity we have, for instance, at our traditional 4-year institutions, to be part of this wave and make this work for them, rather than just continue to exist in their silo. Again, not under imminent threat. We will have colleges and bachelor's degrees for years to come, but there's so much more that the role that capacity can play in helping to provide reskilling, upskilling, skill certification for today's and tomorrow's workforce. So I'm excited that we're thinking big. We're excited by this panel. I'm excited by your interest. As you go forth, wherever you live, just watch this revolution and see what you can add to really make sure that we have a more equitable, a more efficient, and a more innovative way we think about skills and we think about workforce in the coming years. Thank you.